MacBooks are among the most universally useful laptops you can buy, but it's not always easy to pick the right one. They go from $999 to $3,000 or more, so I'm going to show you how to make sure you're not buying too little MacBook or too much. It's actually easier today to pick the right MacBook than it was in the past. You used to be able to get a 12-inch MacBook, a 13-inch MacBook Air, a 13-inch MacBook Pro without a touch bar, a 13-inch Pro with a touch bar, a 15-inch Pro. These days, Apple has really pared it down. There are only three main MacBooks. There's the 13-inch MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, those all have touch bars now, and the new 16-inch MacBook Pro, which of course replaces the older 15-inch model. So yes, that cuts out some of the potential just right for you models, but it also makes it easier to choose, especially because even though these MacBooks look and feel very similar, inside under the hood they're actually very different, so there's going to be one out of these that you naturally gravitate towards. For many years, I called the MacBook Air the most universally useful laptop that you could buy. It cost $999. It was great for students, for entrepreneurs, for coffee shop writers, for basic creative types. It was really the laptop that you saw everywhere all the time. Now, over the years, it started to get a little bit dated. It got left behind. It had a lower resolution screen compared to a lot of other laptops. It had a really thick bezel around the display that looked dated after a while. Even mid-tier Windows laptops were really starting to blow it out of the water. So a couple of years ago, Apple gave it a total top-to-bottom revision, and now the MacBook Air looks and feels a lot like the MacBook Pro, at least on the outside. Inside, there's still a bunch of differences. The most important thing, though, is that the MacBook Air is back down to that magic $999 price after spending a couple of years at slightly higher prices. There is a catch, however. Yes, you can get it for $999. I continue to strongly recommend you throw in an extra $100 because $999 gets you an Intel Core i3 CPU, which is okay, but I'm not spending $1,000 for a Core i3. If you give them another $100, $1099, you get the Intel Core i5 version, which I think you're going to be much happier with long term. I'm slightly annoyed. I call it the $100 Core i5 tax, but it's still a fantastic deal. So if you're going to go with a MacBook Air, that's the one to get. Now, the caveats are the processors in the Air are not as robust as in the Pro models. They use the Y series Intel processors instead of the more mainstream U series. You don't get a touch bar if you cared about that, and you probably don't, but you don't. And you only have the option of two USB-C ports, both on one side of the laptop. You can't get more in an Air no matter what. In the Pro, you can get up to 4 USB ports, 2 on each side, and that's a lot easier to use if you're plugging in peripherals and accessories, or you just want to plug the power cable in on the right side instead of the left side. The 13-inch MacBook Pro is the most recently updated MacBook. They just updated it for 2020 with new processors, more storage space. They doubled the storage in all of the models. And of course, they added the Magic Keyboard. That's the improved keyboard that gets rid of the butterfly keyboard everybody hated. So now every MacBook has that Magic Keyboard, so you don't have to worry about which model you're going to pick. You get that no matter what. Now, there are a couple of catches to the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Number one, if you want the newer 10th generation Intel CPUs, well, then you got to get one of the more expensive models. Does not come on the entry-level models. And if you want the 4 USB-C ports instead of just 2, again, that's only on the more expensive models. Now, of course, you get the touch bar even in the least expensive 13-inch Pro, which starts at $1299. It's not as useful as Apple says it is, and it's not as useless as everybody else says it is. I actually find I use it pretty often for a couple of things. I play around with the volume and the brightness on my MacBook with it, and sometimes some contextual menus pop up that are very handy. Like when I'm using the calculator, you'll get all the calculator controls right there on the touch bar. So that's actually pretty cool. Since they're kind of close in price, you might be tempted to go with the less expensive MacBook Air over the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and for a lot of people, that's going to be the right choice. If you're doing more processor-intensive things like working a lot in Photoshop or Premiere or things where you need a better CPU, well, then you're going to gravitate more towards the Pro. Although I still think for most people, if you're looking for a 13-inch Apple laptop, the MacBook Air is still the right choice. So the 13-inch MacBook Air and 13-inch MacBook Pro, a lot of similarities there, but there's another player. It has been many, many years, and I still hear people lamenting about the late, great 17-inch MacBook Pro, even though Apple discontinued it way back in 2012. People always wanted a bigger screen MacBook. Well, it's back, kind of. Now it's the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which replaces the 15-inch, so it sits right in the middle there between the 15 and the old 17. The main selling point, of course, is all of that screen real estate, which you may need if you're doing a lot of creative work, photos and videos, or even if you're a number cruncher and you just need to have a tremendous amount of material in front of you on the screen at all times. In a way, it's a desktop replacement, but you still want to be able to carry it around occasionally. It's much, much bigger than the other two MacBooks, but for a 16-inch laptop, it's still thinner and lighter and more portable than a lot of just regular Windows 15-inch laptops. Now, like the old 15-inch MacBook Pro, the 16-inch Pro is ridiculously expensive. Starts at $23.99, goes way up from there. These are the only MacBooks you can get with discrete graphics. They have a couple of different AMD Radeon options. Macs are still not gaming machines, but there are more and more games that are cross-compatible with Mac now, so having a GPU helps with that as well. I still don't think anybody buys a Mac for gaming. That said, you don't necessarily need the 16-inch MacBook Pro if you're doing things that are moderately graphics intensive, because at least the other models include Intel Iris graphics, which is at least a step up from the regular off-the-shelf Intel graphics you get in everyday mainstream laptops. So you've got three different MacBooks, different capabilities, different components. Which one do you choose? I'd say if you're an everyday user, web surfing, social media, watching movies online, going to the coffee shop working on your novel, even doing some light creative stuff, or you're at school, you're working on your startup, chances are that $999 MacBook Air is right for you, with the caveat that you throw in another $100 and get the Core i5. It's really gone back to being one of those great universally useful laptops, and I think for most people that's probably the right choice. Now, if you really want the touch bar, which is probably unlikely, or you really want extra USB-C ports, or you need the U-series processors that are more robust than the Y-series processors in the Air, then there's a good case to be made for the 13-inch MacBook Pro. It's a little heftier, it just does a little bit more. I don't think there's a strong case to be made for just everyday average computer users to want to get that one, but if you're looking for something that's literally more professional, that's why they call it the Pro. Now, the last case is that 16-inch MacBook Pro. That's really for someone who's looking for a desktop replacement, or you really need a discrete GPU, you're doing high-end video editing, you're doing high-end Photoshop work, you're working in 3D modeling, or you just want that big, gigantic screen, although that's a pretty hefty premium to pay just for